I never thought my life would unravel in the sterile, cold confines of a hospital room. The moment the doctor said the word cancer, my world shifted. Everything I had once believed was solid ground crumbled beneath my feet. I was terrified, but even in that fear, I clung to one thing: Eric. My husband, the man who promised me forever. He was supposed to be my rock. We were supposed to face this together. At first, he held my hand, whispered promises that we'd get through this. I believed him. I needed to. But as the days passed and the reality of the treatments, the surgeries, the uncertainty sank in, something changed. He grew distant, withdrawn. It started with small things, missed appointments, excuses about work. I brushed them off, convincing myself he was just scared, like I was. But then, one night, as I lay in that hospital bed, fighting for my life, Eric told me he couldn't do it anymore, that he wasn't strong enough to watch me suffer. And just like that, he left. He walked out of my life when I needed him the most, when I was at my most vulnerable. I was devastated. How could the person I loved, the person I thought loved me, abandon me when I was facing the biggest fight of my life? I had never felt so broken, so utterly alone. The moment I needed him the most, he chose to walk away. But as I lay there, staring at the empty chair where Eric once sat, I realized something. This was my fight now. And what Eric didn't know was that my story was far from over. He had no idea what would happen next. Before everything fell apart, my life with Eric looked perfect from the outside. We lived in a cozy, sun-soaked suburban neighborhood in Los Angeles. Our house, white with blue shutters and a front yard full of roses, was the kind of place I had always dreamed of. It was the picture of stability and success, just like our marriage. At least that's what I thought. Eric and I met at a mutual friend's wedding. I still remember the way he looked at me across the room, his smile warm and confident. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew me in immediately. He had this way of making me feel like the only person in the room, as if everything else faded away when we were together. We were inseparable from that night on. The early years of our relationship were blissful. We had so much fun together, late-night dinners at chic restaurants in downtown LA, spontaneous road trips along the coast, and long weekends spent binge-watching our favorite shows. We were that couple who always seemed to be laughing, always in sync. We both had good jobs. Eric was climbing the corporate ladder at a major marketing firm, and I was working as a graphic designer at a small agency. Our lives were comfortable, filled with promise. I thought we were building something solid, something real. We talked about our future, about kids, about growing old together in that cozy house with the blue shutters. But looking back, I can see the cracks that were there, even then. Eric was ambitious, very ambitious. He worked long hours, sometimes staying late at the office or going on business trips that kept him away for days at a time. I used to joke that I'd have to schedule an appointment just to see my own husband. He'd laugh it off, say it was just the way things were for now, that all the hard work would pay off eventually. And I believed him. I trusted him. I loved him. But sometimes, on those nights when he'd get home late, his face tired and his phone still buzzing with work emails, I'd catch a glimpse of something, a certain distance in his eyes. He was there, but not really there, as if part of him had already checked out. I brushed it off as stress. Everyone gets tired, right? He'd been working so hard after all, and I told myself it was just a rough patch. There were other moments too, small things that didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but feel more significant now. Like how he'd miss our anniversary dinner because of some last-minute meeting. Or how he'd forget to ask how my day was, wrapped up in his own world of deadlines and corporate politics. But I didn't see these moments for what they were. I didn't want to. I was too busy being in love, too busy focusing on all the good things we had, to notice that maybe, just maybe, Eric wasn't as committed to us as I was. And then, the day came that changed everything. It started with a doctor's appointment. Just a routine checkup, I thought. But when the tests came back, my world turned upside down. I was diagnosed with cancer. The doctor's words felt like a punch to the gut, and I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe. I kept thinking, this can't be happening. Not to me, not to us. I called Eric from the hospital, my hands trembling, my voice barely a whisper. I have cancer, I told him, my heart breaking as I said the words out loud for the first time. His reaction was immediate, shock, fear, but he promised he'd be there. He promised we'd get through this together. I believed him. I had to believe him. But little did I know, the cracks in our seemingly perfect life were about to widen into a chasm. Everything we had, everything I thought we were, was about to be tested in ways I could have never imagined. I sat in the sterile hospital room, the scent of antiseptic in the air, as the doctor delivered the news that shattered my world. Cancer. The word hit me like a punch to the chest, making it hard to breathe. My mind went blank, and I could barely process what he was saying. Stage 2, aggressive, but treatable. All I heard was cancer. Eric was beside me, holding my hand. His grip tightened when the doctor said the word, and I glanced over at him, hoping to find reassurance. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, eyes wide in shock. But in that moment, I thought we'd get through this together. I believed he'd be my rock. For a few days, it seemed like he might be. He was there, talking to the doctors, scheduling appointments, telling me everything would be fine. He even stayed with me for the first few treatment sessions. I clung to his support, my heart filled with hope. We had been through so much together, and I thought this would just be another challenge to overcome. But slowly, I noticed a shift. Eric stopped asking about my appointments. He'd come home late, always tied up with work. When I tried to talk about the treatments or how scared I was, he'd change the subject, dismissing my worries with, "You'll be fine, don't stress so much." His reassurances were hollow, almost automatic. The warmth I once felt from him started to fade, replaced by a cold distance that I couldn't ignore. I tried to brush it off. I told myself he was just overwhelmed, that this was hard for him too. I didn't want to believe that the man I loved, the man who had promised me forever, was slipping away. I thought if I held on tight enough, if I stayed strong, we'd make it through this storm. But a few weeks into my treatment, the truth became undeniable. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from a particularly grueling chemotherapy session, my body aching, my hair thinning, and my heart heavy with exhaustion. Eric wasn't there when I walked through the door, and when he finally came home, hours later, his expression was distant. He wouldn't meet my eyes as I tried to tell him how hard the day had been, how much I needed him. And then, without warning, he said it. "I can't do this anymore." I stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't watch you go through this. It's too much for me. I'm not strong enough," he said, his words cutting through me like a knife. He was looking down, avoiding my gaze, his hands stuffed in his pockets. I felt my chest tighten as the room began to spin. The man who was supposed to love me, support me through my darkest moments, was walking away when I needed him the most. I reached out to him, but he pulled back. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice emotionless. I can't." And then he left. The sound of the door closing echoed in the silence, leaving me standing alone in the living room, my body trembling with shock and betrayal. I had never felt so alone. The cancer was one thing, but the man I thought I could depend on, my partner, my love, had abandoned me in my darkest hour. The days that followed were a blur. I kept hoping he'd come back, that this was all some horrible mistake, that he would realize he had made a terrible decision. But he never did. And as the treatments continued, so did the isolation. I faced the battle for my life, but I faced it alone. I remember standing in the hospital one day, looking out the window at the busy streets below. People were walking, laughing, living their normal lives. And there I was, battling not just cancer, but the weight of Eric's betrayal. The man who said he loved me, who said we'd be together forever, was gone. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about surviving the cancer. It was about surviving the heartbreak too. I was going to have to do both. The months that followed Eric's abandonment were the hardest of my life. I was left to face the terror of cancer alone, and every day felt like a battle against my own body. Chemotherapy was brutal, draining the life out of me while supposedly saving it. The side effects hit hard: constant nausea, dizziness, the taste of metal that lingered in my mouth. Each session left me weaker, but it was the exhaustion that was most overwhelming. I barely recognized myself. My once full hair thinned, falling out in strands. My skin, pale and dry, felt foreign. And the emptiness of the house Eric and I had built a life in, was almost as unbearable as the physical pain. Every room echoed with memories of what we had been, and what I thought we were going to be. Now, it was just me, fighting to survive, without him. In the quiet moments between treatments, I couldn't help but think of Eric. I thought of the promises we made, how he vowed to be there for me through thick and thin, but when life got hard, when I needed him most, he disappeared. His betrayal cut deeper than any diagnosis. I replayed the day he left over and over in my head, each time wondering if there was something I could have done differently to make him stay. But I wasn't entirely alone. Lena, my oldest friend, stepped in where Eric failed. From the moment I called her and told her about my diagnosis, she was there, ready to support me in every way possible. She was the kind of friend who brought soup when I was too sick to eat, held my hand during the worst of the chemo sessions, and sat with me on the nights when the fear of dying was too much to bear. One evening, as I lay in bed, too weak to move, she sat beside me, holding my hand. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered, her voice steady. "And no matter what happens, you're not doing this alone. I'm here." Her words brought me to tears. After everything, I still had someone who believed in me, who wouldn't abandon me. Despite the physical pain and emotional devastation, I knew I couldn't give up. As the treatments dragged on, I found a new kind of strength, a strength I hadn't known I had. I began to realize that Eric's abandonment, while heartbreaking, didn't define me. My worth wasn't tied to whether or not he could handle my illness. What mattered was my ability to fight, to endure, and to survive. Every day became a test of my willpower. There were times I wanted to quit, times when the pain was too much and the hope too small. But I kept pushing through, not just for myself, but for the people like Lena who stood by me. After months of grueling treatments, my body ravaged, but still standing, I returned to the hospital for another round of tests. I was prepared for the worst. I had conditioned myself to expect it. But when the doctor entered the room, his face wasn't somber. It was soft, almost smiling. "The cancer is in remission," he said gently. "You survived." The relief I had been hoping for didn't wash over me the way I imagined it would. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. Yes, I had beaten cancer. I had survived. But I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything I had lost in the process. Eric, our future together, the sense of safety and love I thought I had. I had survived, but my life would never be the same. As I walked out of the hospital that day, the sun shining a little too brightly for my tired eyes, I realized that my fight wasn't just about cancer. It was about healing the parts of me that Eric's betrayal had broken, about learning to live again, not as his fiancée, but as a woman who had fought for her life and won. Life after cancer was about rebuilding. I was slowly getting back on my feet, emotionally and physically. The house felt different, quieter, but in a way, it had become my sanctuary. I had fought through the darkest moments of my life, and with Lena's help, I was starting to find a sense of peace. My days were no longer filled with fear of dying, but with small victories. Every moment felt like a gift. That's when Eric reappeared. It started with a phone call out of the blue. I hadn't spoken to him since the day he walked out of my life. Seeing his name flash on my phone sent a wave of shock through me. For a split second, I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Hey, it's Eric. I heard you're okay now," he stammered, his voice sounding both nervous and apologetic. "I made a huge mistake, and I need to see you." I was speechless, and a mixture of emotions flooded my mind. Anger, betrayal, but also a flicker of the love I once felt. How could he have the nerve to reach out after abandoning me at my lowest? "I don't think there's anything to say, Eric," I replied, my voice sharp. But he persisted. He kept calling, leaving messages, telling me how much he regretted leaving, how sorry he was, and how he had never stopped thinking about me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let him come over. A few days later, Eric showed up at my doorstep with flowers and gifts, as if these tokens could erase the months of pain and loneliness. I stared at him, struggling to process how the man who had walked out of my life now stood here, expecting forgiveness. "I'm so sorry," he said, stepping inside. "I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. Watching you suffer was too much for me, and I was a coward. But I've realized how wrong I was. I've missed you every single day." The sight of him, the sound of his voice, it brought back a flood of memories. The early days of our relationship, the love we shared, the plans we made. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of the love I used to have for him. But then, the reality of what he did hit me. He left me when I needed him most. He abandoned me to face death on my own. "How do you expect me to believe anything you say, Eric?" I asked, my voice laced with hurt and anger. "You left me when I was dying. You left me to go through the hardest thing of my life alone." Eric's face fell, and he dropped to his knees. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I can't undo what I did, but please give me a second chance. I'll do anything to prove I've changed." I crossed my arms, staring at him, torn between the love we once had and the pain he caused. I remembered the man I used to know, the one who made me laugh, who held my hand through life's ups and downs. But I also remembered the man who couldn't handle my illness, the one who disappeared when I was at my weakest. Eric leaned forward, his voice filled with desperation. "After I left you, everything fell apart. My job, my life, it all crumbled. I couldn't focus at work. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about you. I couldn't escape the guilt. You were right. I was weak. But losing you made me realize how much you mean to me. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but please, just give me a chance to make it right." For a moment, I was silent. The room felt heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him to get out of my life for good. But another part of me, the part that had once loved him so deeply, wanted to believe that he had changed. "I don't know if I can do that," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "You hurt me in ways I can't even begin to explain. I had to fight for my life, and you weren't there. I'm here now," he said softly, "and I want to make things right." I looked at him, my mind racing. Could I really trust him again? Could I forgive the man who left me when I needed him most? I didn't know. I was torn between the satisfaction of revenge, making him feel the weight of what he did, and the desire for closure, to finally put the past behind me. "I'll need time," I finally said, my voice firm but uncertain. Eric nodded, relief washing over his face. But as he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what happened, things would never be the same. I sat alone in my living room, staring out the window, lost in thought. Eric's return had thrown my world into chaos. A part of me wanted to believe him, to believe that he was truly sorry, that he had changed, that maybe we could rebuild what we once had. After all, We had shared years together, years that weren't all bad. I remembered the love we had, the laughter, the plans we made for our future. But then, the memories of his betrayal came rushing back. The nights I spent alone in the hospital, fighting for my life while he was nowhere to be found. The pain, both physical and emotional, was something I could never forget. He had abandoned me when I needed him most. How could I forgive that? I was torn. Could someone like Eric really change? Could I open my heart to him again, knowing what he had done? Or was I fooling myself, clinging to a past that no longer existed? I reached for my phone and called Lena. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was her. When Lena arrived, we sat together on the couch, the silence heavy between us. I didn't even have to say a word. She already knew. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice trembling with uncertainty. Part of me wants to forgive him, to move forward with him, but the other part of me, I don't think I can ever trust him again. Lena listened, her expression thoughtful. I get it. You two have a lot of history. It's not easy to let that go, but forgiveness doesn't mean you have to let him back into your life. Her words made me pause. Could I forgive him without letting him back in? Lena continued, the thing is, you have to do what feels right for you. Not because of the years you spent together, not because of the love you once had, but because of who you are now. You've survived so much without him. You're stronger now than you've ever been. I nodded, taking in her words. It was true. I had fought through cancer, survived Eric's abandonment, and rebuilt my life from the ground up. I wasn't the same person I was before. I had learned how to stand on my own 2 feet. But what if he really has changed? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What if we could be happy again? Lena looked at me, her gaze steady. That's for you to decide. But ask yourself this. Are you thinking about giving him another chance because you miss him, or because you miss the idea of what you two used to be? Sometimes we hold on to the past because we're afraid of what's next. Her words hit me like a wave of truth. I realized that maybe I wasn't just mourning the loss of Eric. I was mourning the life we had planned, the future we were supposed to have. But that future didn't exist anymore. The woman who had loved Eric so deeply had been changed by the battle she fought alone. I didn't need Eric to feel whole. I didn't need his validation to prove that I was worthy of love. Maybe I can forgive him, I said slowly, but I don't think I can go back to what we were. Too much has changed. Lena smiled softly. Then that's your answer. You've already moved on in so many ways. Maybe it's time to let yourself fully step into this new chapter. As Lena left, I sat in the quiet of my home, feeling a sense of clarity. I could forgive Eric for what he did, but that didn't mean I had to invite him back into my life. Forgiveness was for me, not for him. And now it was time to move forward, stronger and wiser than before. The cafe was quiet, with only a few people scattered at tables around us. The soft hum of conversation and the clinking of cups filled the air as I sat across from Eric, seeing him face to face for the first time since he left me. His eyes searched mine, filled with regret, but I felt nothing. The butterflies I once got from looking at him had long since disappeared. Eric shifted in his seat, clearly nervous. "I'm sorry, I really am," he began, his voice softer than I remembered. "I made a huge mistake, leaving you. I don't know what I was thinking. I was scared, and I acted like a coward." I nodded, letting him speak, but my heart remained steady. I wasn't the same person I had been when he left. I had fought my battles without him. Eric leaned forward, his hands clasped together as if he were pleading. "I'll do anything to make it right. I can't stop thinking about you, about us. I still love you, and I know I don't deserve another chance. But I'm asking for one." There was a time when those words would have been enough. A time when I would have jumped at the opportunity to fix things. But not anymore. I looked at him, calm and composed. "Eric, I've thought a lot about what you did, about what we were," I said slowly. And I've realized something. I survived without you. I found a strength in myself that I didn't know I had." His eyes widened, as if he didn't expect me to be so sure of myself. "I don't need you anymore," I continued, the words rolling off my tongue with an ease that surprised even me. "I've moved on. The pain you caused, it shaped me, but it doesn't define me anymore, and neither do you." Eric sat back, stunned, his mouth slightly open. "But I can change. I have changed. I want to be the man you deserve." I shook my head. "It's too late, Eric. You made your choice when you walked away, and I made mine when I decided to live without you." There was a moment of silence between us, the weight of my words settling in. I could see the regret on his face, the realization that he had lost me for good, but I didn't feel satisfaction or vengeance. What I felt was freedom. I stood up, grabbing my coat. "I wish you the best, Eric, but my life doesn't include you anymore." With that, I walked away, leaving him sitting there in the cafe, stunned and speechless. As I stepped out into the bright Los Angeles sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was free from the past, from the pain, from him, and I had finally found peace. The soft roar of the waves and the scent of salt water filled the air as I walked along the Los Angeles shoreline. The sand felt warm beneath my feet, grounding me in this moment, a moment I had earned. After everything, I was finally free. There was a time when I couldn't imagine feeling this way, when cancer and Eric's betrayal had consumed my life. I had been stripped down to nothing, forced to confront my fears and weaknesses alone, but in that process, I found something stronger than I ever thought I possessed. I found myself. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of me, a reminder of how vast and unpredictable life could be. The journey I'd been on was not what I had planned. It was painful, filled with moments of doubt and despair, but through the heartbreak, I realized something profound. I didn't need Eric to survive. I didn't need anyone's love to feel worthy. I survived cancer. I faced the darkness. I walked through it, and I came out the other side, not just intact, but transformed. As the waves lapped at my feet, I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who depended on Eric, who believed that love was enough to conquer anything. I had loved him, trusted him, and when he walked out on me, I thought I'd never recover. But I was wrong. His absence forced me to find strength within myself. I became my own anchor, and in doing so, I learned that I could stand alone. Now, I was ready to embrace a new chapter. A chapter where I wrote my own story, without the shadows of the past weighing me down. For the first time in a long time, the future felt open, full of possibilities. I wasn't scared anymore. As I continued walking, the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the ocean. It felt symbolic, like the end of one part of my life and the beginning of something new. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer defined by the pain I had endured. I was stronger, I was free, and whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. With a deep breath, I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. The past was behind me, and the horizon ahead was filled with hope.